the Christmas stocking stuffer murder. Good evening, my friends. My name is Stephen, and welcome to Mindful Musings. I invite you to pour yourself something warm, settle into your favourite chair, and join me as we journey once more to the village of Lochdoub. Tonight's tale unfolds during the Christmas season, when the Highlands are blanketed in snow and the spirit of giving should reign supreme. But, as Police Constable Hamish Macbeth will discover, even the most charitable gestures can hide the darkest of intentions. A charity organiser lies dead after a Christmas morning event, poisoned by chocolates meant to bring joy. What begins as an act of holiday kindness becomes a lesson in exploitation, revenge, and the devastating consequences of using human suffering for personal gain. Now tell me, do you find comfort in these mysteries during the long winter nights? If so, I would be honoured to have you subscribe and join me for more tales from the Highlands. Together we will explore how even the season of goodwill can harbour secrets that demand justice. Now, let us begin. The Christmas stocking stuffer murder, a Hamish Macbeth mystery. Chapter 1. The Morning of False Charity. Christmas morning arrived in Lochdoub with the hushed beauty of fresh snowfall. Police Constable Hamish Macbeth stood at his kitchen window, watching fat flakes drift past the street lamp, each one catching the light like a tiny star before disappearing into the white blanket that covered the village. His dog Lugs, a peculiar beast with one ear that stood up and one that flopped down, sat hopefully beside the stove where Hamish was frying bacon and eggs. It was barely 6 o'clock, and Hamish had the contented feeling of a man who had nowhere particular to be and nothing urgent to do. Christmas Day in Lochdoub was traditionally quiet, with most residents occupied with family gatherings and the aftermath of too much whiskey from the night before. He had declined Mrs. Wellington's invitation to Christmas dinner at the manse, knowing the minister's wife would have invited half the village, and he would end up trapped for hours listening to the Curry sisters complain about modern Christmas decorations. Instead, he planned a peaceful day with Lugs, perhaps a walk up to the loch if the snow eased, and a proper dinner of his own making. He was just settling down to his breakfast when his mobile phone shattered the morning peace. It was Angela Brodie, the doctor's wife, and her voice carried an urgency that made Hamish set down his fork immediately. "Hamish, you need to come to the church hall right away. Something terrible has happened. It is Moira Campbell. She has collapsed, and Dr. Brodie thinks she might be dead." Hamish felt his peaceful Christmas morning evaporate like morning mist. Moira Campbell was the village busybody who had organised the Christmas stocking charity event, a morning distribution of gift-filled stockings to homeless families from across Sutherland. He had seen the posters up around the village for weeks, complete with photographs of gaunt faces and desperate eyes, appealing for donations to make Christmas special for those less fortunate. "I will be there in 5 minutes," he said, already reaching for his jacket. "Have you called for an ambulance?" "Dr. Brodie says there is no point. She is gone, Hamish. It happened so quickly. One moment she was eating chocolates from one of the stockings, the next she was on the floor convulsing. Hamish drove the short distance to the church hall with his blue light flashing, though the streets were deserted. The hall sat beside the Church of Scotland Kirk, a modest stone building that served as the village's gathering place for everything from wedding receptions to whist drives. Several cars were parked outside despite the early hour, and Hamish recognised them as belonging to the volunteers who had helped Moira organise the event. Inside, the hall had been transformed into a festive distribution centre. Long tables were laden with stockings, each one bulging with gifts and treats. A banner stretched across one wall proclaimed "Season of Giving" in glittery letters. But the cheerful decorations were at odds with the scene before him. Moira Campbell lay on the floor near one of the tables, her body covered with someone's coat. Dr. Brodie knelt beside her, his face grave. Angela stood nearby with several other volunteers, all of them pale and shocked. A group of homeless families clustered near the door, unsure whether to stay or leave, their children clutching the stockings they had already received. Hamish approached Dr. Brodie, who looked up and shook his head. "She is dead, Hamish. No question about it. The symptoms suggest some kind of severe poisoning. Rapid onset, violent convulsions, respiratory failure. I've seen something like this before during my training. It could be nicotine poisoning." "Nicotine?" Hamish felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. How would she have ingested nicotine? Dr. Brodie pointed to a half-eaten chocolate on the floor near Moira's body. She was sampling the chocolates from that stocking there. Said something about quality control, making sure everything was suitable for the families. She bit into one, made a face like it tasted odd, then tried to say something before she collapsed. Hamish looked at the stocking in question, a red velvet one with white fur trim, lying on its side with chocolates scattered around it. He pulled on a pair of gloves he kept in his jacket pocket and carefully picked up the stocking, examining it without disturbing the chocolates further. It looked identical to all the others, filled with small gifts, candy canes, and a box of what appeared to be expensive handmade chocolates. "Did anyone else eat any of these chocolates?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "No, thank God," Angela said. Moira was the only one. She always insisted on checking everything personally before. Distribution. She said it was her responsibility as organizer. Hamish looked around at the gathered volunteers. "I am going to need statements from everyone who was here when this happened, and no one is to touch anything on these tables. This is now a crime scene." He pulled out his mobile and called Detective Chief Inspector Blair in Strathbane, delivering the news he knew would ruin Blair's Christmas Day and make the man even more insufferable than usual. The next hour was controlled chaos. The ambulance arrived to take Moira's body, though there was nothing the paramedics could do. Blair arrived in a foul temper, his face red and his breath smelling of whiskey. The homeless families were ushered out after giving their names and contact information, the children crying because they had to leave their stockings behind as potential evidence. Hamish interviewed each volunteer, making careful notes. They all told the same story. Moira had been particular about the event running smoothly, had inspected each stocking herself, had insisted on checking the quality of the donated items. She had been in high spirits, talking about what a success the charity had become and how many donations they had received this year. One volunteer, a young woman named Fiona MacLeod, mentioned something that caught Hamish's attention. Moira had been very specific about which stocking she wanted to check. She went right to that red velvet one, almost like she knew it would be special. She said something about it being from a particularly generous donor. "Do you know who donated it?" Hamish asked. Fiona shook her head. "The stockings came in from all over. People dropped them off here at the hall over the past 2 weeks. We kept them in the storage room until this morning. Moira was the only one who kept track of who donated what. She had a whole filing system." Hamish found the filing system in Moira's office, a small room off the main hall. It was meticulously organised, with folders for each donor and detailed records of every contribution. But when he looked for the red velvet stocking, he found no record of it. Either Moira had not yet filed the information, or someone had removed it. As he stood in the office looking at the evidence of Moira's careful organisation, Hamish felt the first stirrings of unease that went beyond the tragedy of a death on Christmas morning. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The missing donor information, the way Moira had gone straight to that particular stocking, the expensive chocolates that someone had laced with poison. Blair appeared in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. "Well, Macbeth, looks like your quiet little village has given me a murder for Christmas. I want this wrapped up quickly, you hear? Start checking on anyone who had a grudge against the victim, and get that stocking to forensics in Strathbane. I want to know exactly what was in those chocolates." Hamish nodded, but his mind was already working, on a different angle. In his experience, murder was rarely random. If someone had gone to the trouble of poisoning chocolates and placing them in a specific stocking at a charity event, they had done so with careful intent. The question was not just who wanted Moira Campbell dead, but why they had chosen this particular method and this particular moment. As he left the church hall and walked back to his Land Rover through the falling snow, Hamish thought about Christmas and charity and the darkness that could hide behind the brightest smiles. Somewhere in Lochdoub or beyond, someone was spending Christmas Day knowing they had committed murder, and Hamish Macbeth intended to find them, peaceful holiday or not. Chapter 2. The Photographer's Dark Collection. The morning after Christmas brought no relief from the snow. Lochdoub woke to drifts that blocked doors and buried garden walls, transforming the village into something from a Victorian Christmas card. But Hamish Macbeth had no time to appreciate the scenery. He was at the police station before dawn, going through the boxes of materials he had collected from Moira Campbell's office at the church hall. Blair had returned to Strathbane the previous afternoon, leaving Hamish with strict instructions to compile information on the victim and report back with a list of potential suspects. The forensics team had taken the poisoned chocolates in the red velvet stocking, promising results within 48 hours. In the meantime, Hamish had the unglamorous task of learning everything he could about Moira Campbell. What he discovered as he sorted through her papers made him increasingly uncomfortable. Moira had been 62 years old, unmarried, retired from a career in marketing and public relations in Edinburgh. She had moved to Lochtdube 5 years ago, buying a small cottage on the edge of the village and immediately immersing herself in local activities. She had organised fundraisers, coordinated charity events, and made herself indispensable to every good cause in the area. But it was her photography that troubled Hamish. Among her papers he found hundreds of photographs, all carefully labelled and filed. They showed homeless people in various states of desperation, captured in unflinching detail. Gaunt faces, tattered clothing, makeshift shelters, children with hollow eyes, elderly people huddled in doorways. Each photograph was technically excellent, composed with an artist's eye for drama and emotional impact. The photographs had been used extensively in Moira's fundraising materials. Hamish found copies of appeals that had been sent to potential donors across Scotland, each one featuring these stark images, alongside heartbreaking descriptions of poverty and suffering. The appeals had been extraordinarily effective, according to the financial records he found. Moira's Christmas stocking charity had raised over £50,000 in the past year alone. But as Hamish dug deeper into the financial records, he began to see discrepancies. The amount of money raised did not match the amount spent on actual charitable activities. Large sums were listed as administrative costs, travel expenses, and equipment purchases. When he compared the grand total of donations to the actual value of the stockings distributed yesterday, the numbers did not add up at all. A knock at the door interrupted his calculations. It was Angela Brodie, carrying a thermos of tea and looking worried. "I thought you might need this," she said. "I saw your light on from our house, and knew you must have been up all night." Hamish accepted the tea gratefully and invited her in. Angela had known Moira better than most people in the village, having worked alongside her on several charity projects. She might have insights that would help him understand the woman behind the carefully cultivated public image. "Angela, did Moira ever talk to you about where she got those photographs? The ones she used in her fundraising materials?" Angela frowned, settling into the chair across from Hamish's desk. She took them herself. She was quite proud of her photography skills. She said she wanted to show the reality of homelessness, to make it impossible for people to ignore. "Why?" Hamish pulled out one of the photographs, a particularly striking image of a young girl sitting on a cardboard mat in what appeared to be a Glasgow doorway. The child's face was gaunt, her eyes enormous and sorrowful. It was the kind of image that would compel anyone to open their wallet. Did she have permission to take these photographs? Did she ask the people in them if they consented to having their images used for fundraising? Angela's frown deepened. "I do not know. I assumed she did. Surely that would be required." Hamish had been thinking the same thing. He had spent part of the previous night researching the legal and ethical requirements for charitable organisations, and what he had learned troubled him greatly. Using someone's image for fundraising without their explicit consent was not just ethically questionable, it could be illegal, particularly if those images were being used to generate significant sums of money. "I think Moira was running what some people call poverty porn," Hamish said quietly. She was exploiting the homeless people she photographed, using their suffering to raise money without necessarily spending that money on helping them. Look at these financial records. She raised £50,000 but only spent about £15,000 on actual stockings and gifts. The rest went to administrative costs that look suspiciously like personal income. Angela's face paled. "But that would mean—" "Oh, Hamish, that is horrible. Those poor people having their worst moments captured and sold to make someone else money." Hamish nodded grimly. And if one of those people found out what Moira was doing, if they discovered their photograph or their child's photograph was being used without consent to line Moira's pockets, well, that would be a powerful motive for murder. He spent the rest of the morning on the phone, calling homeless shelters and charitable organisations across Scotland. He described Moira's photography project, asked if anyone had complained about being photographed without permission, inquired about any incidents involving a woman with a camera who claimed to be documenting homelessness for charitable purposes. It was a volunteer at a Glasgow shelter who finally gave him the lead he needed. "Oh, I remember her," the woman said, her voice sharp with remembered anger. "She came here about 8 months ago, claiming she wanted to help. She took photographs of some of our residents without asking properly, and when one of the fathers found out his daughter's picture was being used on fundraising materials, he was furious, threatened to go to the papers about it, made quite a scene. Do you remember the father's name? Robert Mackenzie. He was staying here with his daughter Lily. Lovely wee girl, about 7 years old. He had lost his job and his home when his wife died of cancer. He was trying so hard to get back on his feet, to provide for his daughter with dignity. Then he saw that photograph on a leaflet someone had received in the post, and he lost it. Said the woman had promised the photos were just for documentation, not for public distribution. Said she had exploited his daughter's suffering for profit. What happened after that? The woman on the phone sighed. Robert filed a complaint with the Charity Commission, but I do not know if anything came of it. He and Lily left the shelter not long after. He had got himself into a housing program and found work. Last I heard, they were doing better. He was determined to rebuild their lives and put the whole experience behind them. Hamish thanked her and ended the call, his mind racing. Robert Mackenzie, a father whose daughter's image had been exploited, a man who had been homeless but had fought his way back to stability, a man who had filed a complaint against Moira Campbell. It was not proof of murder, but it was certainly motive. He pulled up police databases and searched for Robert Mackenzie. The man had no criminal record, which was not surprising, but Hamish found an address in Dingwall about 30 miles from Lochdoub. According to local records, Robert Mackenzie worked as a maintenance technician at a hospital and lived in council housing with his daughter. Hamish sat back in his chair, thinking. A father protecting his daughter's dignity and privacy. A man who had clawed his way out of homelessness, only to find his family's suffering being sold for profit. If Robert Mackenzie had discovered that Moira was still using his daughter's photograph, still profiting from their pain despite his complaints, what might he have done? The snow was falling harder now, making travel difficult. But Hamish knew he needed to talk to Robert Mackenzie, and soon. Before he could leave, however, his phone rang. It was the forensics lab in Strathbane, and the technician's voice was grim. "Constable Macbeth, we have the results on those chocolates. They were injected with concentrated liquid nicotine, enough to kill 3 people. Whoever prepared these knew exactly what they were doing. And there is something else. We found a partial fingerprint on the stocking, inside the cuff where someone might have gripped it, while placing it with the others. We are running it through the database now." Hamish felt a chill run down his spine. If they found a match for that fingerprint, the case might be solved within hours. But even as he waited for the results, he could not shake the image of a little girl's face in a photograph, her suffering captured and sold, her dignity stolen by someone who claimed to be helping. If Robert Mackenzie had poisoned those chocolates, Hamish thought he might understand why. Understanding, of course, was not the same as condoning. Murder was murder, no matter how righteous the motivation. But as he prepared to drive to Dingwall through the blizzard, Hamish found himself hoping that the fingerprints would not match, that Robert Mackenzie had found some other way to deal with his anger and pain. Even as he hoped, though, his instincts told him otherwise. The pieces were falling into place, and they all pointed toward a father who had finally taken justice into his own hands. Chapter 3. The Man Who Rose from Nothing. The drive to Dingwall took nearly 2 hours through snow that seemed determined to bury the highlands entirely. Hamish's Land Rover ploughed through drifts that would have stopped a normal vehicle, the heater working overtime to keep the windscreen clear. Lugg sat in the passenger seat with the resigned expression of a dog who had long since given up questioning his master's decisions to venture out in impossible weather. Hamish had called ahead to the Dingwall police station, informing them of his investigation and requesting they send an officer to accompany him to Robert Mackenzie's address. Professional courtesy demanded he not conduct interviews on another station's territory without cooperation, and besides, having a local officer along might prevent misunderstandings. The officer who met him at the station was a young woman named Constable Fraser, sharp-eyed and efficient. She knew the Mackenzie address and offered to drive, as she was familiar with the estate where he lived. They took her patrol car, leaving lugs in Hamish's Land Rover with a bowl of water and a stern instruction to behave. Robert Mackenzie lives in the Jubilee Court Flats, Fraser explained as they drove through Dingwall's snow-choked streets. It is not the nicest area, but it is decent enough. He has a reputation as a good tenant, quiet, keeps to himself. His daughter goes to the local primary school. Teachers say she is bright and well cared for. Has he had any trouble with the law? Not that I am aware of. He did some work for the hospital recently, installing new security systems. They speak highly of him. He's apparently quite skilled with electronics and mechanical systems. Learned it all on his own, according to his supervisor. They pulled up outside a grey concrete block of flats that looked like it had been built in the 1960s and forgotten about ever since. But the building was well maintained despite its grim exterior, and the entrance was clean and secure. Fraser used the intercom to buzz Mackenzie's flat, and after a moment a man's voice answered, cautious and suspicious. "Mr. Mackenzie, this is Constable Fraser from Dingwall Station. I am here with Constable Macbeth from Loughdoob. We need to speak with you about a matter. May we come up?" There was a long pause. Finally the buzzer sounded and the door unlocked. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to the top floor where Robert Mackenzie stood, waiting in the doorway of his flat. He was a man in his mid-30s, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had seen too much hardship too early. His clothes were clean but worn, and his eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "What is this about?" he asked, not moving aside to let them in. "Is Lily all right?" "Your daughter is fine, as far as we know," Hamish said gently. "This is about something else. May we come inside?" Mackenzie hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. The flat was small but scrupulously clean, furnished with mismatched second-hand pieces that someone had arranged with care. Children's drawings covered one wall, bright splashes of colour in the drab space. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and cheap tinsel. A little girl sat on the sofa, watching a cartoon on an ancient television. She looked up as they entered, her face curious but not frightened. Hamish recognised her immediately from the photograph in Moira's files. Lily Mackenzie, 7 years old, with enormous dark eyes and a solemn expression. "Lily, love, why do not you go play in your room for a bit?" Mackenzie said. "I need to talk to these officers." The girl nodded obediently and disappeared down the short hallway. Mackenzie waited until he heard her door close before turning back to Hamish and Fraser. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Whatever this is about, I have done nothing wrong. I work hard, I pay my rent, I take care of my daughter. We have put our past behind us." "I am investigating a death, Mr. Mackenzie," Hamish said. "A woman named Moira Campbell died on Christmas morning in Loughdoob. She was poisoned with nicotine-laced chocolates at a charity event she organised." He watched Mackenzie's face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. What he saw instead was shock, followed by something that might have been satisfaction, quickly suppressed. Mackenzie sat down heavily in a chair, his hands shaking slightly. "Moira Campbell is dead," he said, slowly. "The woman who took those photographs, the one who exploited my daughter. You knew her then," Hamish said, taking out his notebook. Mackenzie laughed bitterly. "Knew her? She destroyed what little dignity we had left. 8 months ago, when Lily and I were at our lowest point, staying in a homeless shelter in Glasgow, she came around with her camera, said she was documenting homelessness for a charity, said the photos would help raise awareness and money to help people like us. She promised the photos would not be used publicly, that they were just for internal documentation. But she used them anyway." Mackenzie's voice rose with anger. "She plastered my daughter's face all over fundraising leaflets, made her a poster child for poverty. Do you know what that feels like, to see your child's worst moment turned into marketing material? I filed a complaint with the Charity Commission. I threatened to go to the papers. She finally agreed to stop using Lily's photograph, promised it would not appear on any more materials. Did she keep that promise? Mackenzie stood abruptly and went to a drawer in the kitchen. He pulled out a glossy leaflet and handed it to Hamish. It was dated just 2 weeks ago. The front showed the same photograph of Lily sitting on her cardboard mat, looking lost and hopeless. The text proclaimed, "Give the gift of hope this Christmas. Donate to the Christmas Stocking Fund." "I found this in a shop in Inverness 2 weeks ago," Mackenzie said, his voice shaking. "She had promised, and she lied. She was still using my daughter's suffering to make money. So, yes, Constable, I knew Moira Campbell, and I am not sorry she is dead." Hamish felt the case shifting, pieces falling into place with an almost audible click. "Mr. Mackenzie, I need to ask you directly. Where were you on Christmas morning?" "I was here with Lily. We had breakfast together, opened the few presents I could afford, then went to my mother's house in Inverness for dinner. We left here about 9 in the morning and did not get back until late that evening. Can anyone besides your mother verify that?" Mackenzie's face paled as he realised the direction of Hamish's questions. "Wait, you think I killed her? You think I poisoned those chocolates?" "I'm investigating all possibilities, Mr. Mackenzie. The chocolates were injected with liquid nicotine. Someone with knowledge of chemistry or mechanics might have the skills to prepare such a poison and inject it precisely into individual chocolates." "I would never," Mackenzie started, then stopped. His hands were shaking harder now. "Yes, I hated her. Yes, I wanted her to pay for what she did, but I would never commit murder. I have a daughter who depends on me. I've worked too hard to build a life for us to throw it all away." "When was the last time you were in Loch Dubh?" Hamish asked. Mackenzie hesitated. 3 weeks ago. I did some maintenance work at the hospital there. It was a 2-day job, installing new security, cameras in the emergency department." Hamish made a note of this. "During those 2 days, did you visit the church hall?" "No, I did not even know there was going to be a charity event. I stayed focused on my work and left as soon as it was finished." Another piece of the puzzle. Mackenzie had been in Loch Dubh weeks before the murder, would have had opportunity to observe the preparations for the Christmas event, could have learned about the stocking distribution. He had motive, opportunity, and the technical skills to prepare the poison. "Mr. Mackenzie, I am going to need you to come to Loch Dubh for formal questioning. We will need to take your fingerprints for comparison with evidence we have collected, and I will need contact information for your mother to verify your alibi for Christmas morning." Mackenzie's face crumbled. "Please," he said, "Lily has already been through so much. If I am arrested, if I go to jail, what happens to her? She has no one else. My mother is elderly and cannot take care of a child full time." "I am not arresting you yet," Hamish said, "but I need you to cooperate with this investigation. The truth will come out, Mr. Mackenzie. It always does. And if you are innocent, proving that is in your best interest." As they left the flat, Hamish heard Lily's door open and her small voice calling, "Daddy!" The sound of it, frightened and uncertain, haunted him all the way back to Loch Dubh. He thought about fathers and daughters, about desperation and dignity, about the terrible choices people made when pushed too far. Robert Mackenzie had every reason to want Moira Campbell dead, but whether he had actually gone through with murder remained to be proven. The fingerprint results would tell them more. Until then, Hamish had to keep investigating, had to follow every thread, had to find the truth no matter where it led, or whose life it destroyed in the process. Chapter 4. The Pattern of Careful Planning. By the time Hamish returned to Loch Dubh, the short winter day was already fading into darkness. The village looked like something from a fairy tale, lights twinkling in cottage windows, smoke rising from chimneys, snow continuing to fall in gentle persistence. But Hamish had no time to appreciate the beauty. His mind was churning with the case, turning over every detail, looking for the pattern he knew must be there. He stopped at the church hall on his way back to the station. The building was still cordoned off with police tape, but Hamish had the keys and let himself in. The hall was cold and dark, the festive decorations now looking forlorn in the shadows. He stood in the centre of the room, trying to reconstruct the events of Christmas morning in his mind. Moira Campbell had arrived early, perhaps 6 in the morning, to set up. The volunteers had arrived around 7. The homeless families were scheduled to begin arriving at 8. But Moira had died just after 7:30, before most of the families had shown up. She had gone directly to one specific stocking, the red velvet one, as if she knew it was special or different. Hamish went to the storage room where the stockings had been kept in the weeks before the event. It was a small space, cluttered with boxes and supplies. Anyone could have accessed it if they knew where to look. The door had a simple lock that could be easily picked or bypassed by someone with the right skills. He thought about Robert Mackenzie's expertise with security systems and mechanical devices. A man with such skills would certainly know how to pick a simple lock, would know how to slip in and out of a building without being noticed. But would he have known which stocking to choose? How would he have ensured that Moira would select that particular one? The answer came to him as he examined the remaining stockings, still sitting on the tables where they had been abandoned. They were all similar, but not identical. Some were simple red felt, others were green or white, a few were elaborately decorated. But the red velvet one that had contained the poisoned chocolates had been different, noticeably fancier, and more expensive than the others. Moira Campbell, with her background in marketing and her obsession with appearances, would naturally have been drawn to the most impressive stocking. If someone had wanted to ensure she would check that particular one first, making it stand out from the others was a clever strategy. Hamish's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Blair, calling from Strathbane with the fingerprint results. "Macbeth, we have got a match on that partial print from the stocking. Robert Mackenzie. His prints are on file from a background check he had done for his hospital work. I want him brought in for questioning immediately." "I have already spoken with him, sir," Hamish said. "He admits to hating the victim, admits to having been in Loch Dubh 3 weeks ago, but claims he was with his daughter and mother on Christmas morning." "Claims are not alibis, Macbeth. Get him in here. I want this case wrapped up before New Year." After ending the call, Hamish sat in his Land Rover, lugs beside him, thinking about the timeline and the evidence. The fingerprint was damning, certainly, but it was not necessarily conclusive. Mackenzie had been in Loch Dubh 3 weeks before the murder. He could have left that fingerprint then, if he had visited the church hall for some innocent reason. Or he could have left it when placing the poisoned stocking, as Blair assumed. But something bothered Hamish about the timing. If Mackenzie had prepared the stocking 3 weeks ago, how could he be sure the chocolates would still be fresh and appealing by Christmas morning? Chocolate went stale, packaging showed signs of tampering, liquid nicotine might evaporate or change the appearance of the candy. For the poisoning to work, the chocolates needed to look and smell normal, needed to be tempting enough that Moira would actually eat one, unless Mackenzie had not prepared the stocking 3 weeks ago, unless he had found a way to add it to the collection much more recently, perhaps even on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning itself. But how would he have accessed the church hall without being seen? And how would he have known that Moira would be alone long enough to check that particular stocking? Hamish drove to Moira Campbell's cottage, a neat stone building on the edge of the village. He had already been through it once with Blair, but he wanted another look with fresh eyes. The cottage was still locked and sealed, the key in Hamish's possession. He let himself in, careful not to disturb anything. The cottage revealed more about Moira than her office at the church hall had. Her living room was filled with expensive furniture and artwork, all of it tasteful and carefully chosen. The kitchen contained high-end appliances and gourmet ingredients. Upstairs, her bedroom closet held designer clothes and expensive shoes. For a woman who claimed to dedicate her life to charity, Moira Campbell had certainly lived well. In her study, Hamish found more financial records, these ones more carefully hidden than those at the church hall. Bank statements showing regular transfers from the charity account to her personal account, labelled as salary and expenses. Receipts for purchases that seemed to have little to do with charitable work and everything to do with personal luxury. But it was the photographs that truly revealed Moira's character. Besides the files of homeless people, Hamish found albums full of her own photographs, carefully documenting her charitable work. Moira at fundraising events, Moira accepting donations, Moira posing with grateful recipients. In every photo, she was perfectly made up, perfectly dressed, the very picture of benevolent generosity. The photographs told a story of narcissism and exploitation, of a woman who had found a way to feel important and live comfortably by monetizing other people's suffering. No wonder Robert Mackenzie had been enraged. No wonder he had felt violated when he discovered what she had done with his daughter's image. In a locked drawer in Moira's desk, Hamish found something that made his blood run cold. A notebook filled with detailed information about the people she had photographed. Names, locations, circumstances, and beside each entry, notes about how effective their images were in fundraising campaigns. Lily Mackenzie's entry was particularly detailed, with notes about how her innocent face and large eyes generated emotional responses from donors. There were even calculations about how much money her photograph alone had raised. Moira had not just exploited these people, she had studied them, analysed them, turned their suffering into a business model. And she had kept detailed records of her exploitation, perhaps because she was too arrogant to believe anyone would ever call her to account. Hamish sat at Moira's desk, reading through the notebook, feeling a growing sense of disgust. He thought about Robert Mackenzie, scraping together a life for himself and his daughter, only to discover that the worst moment of their lives was still being sold for profit. He thought about all the other people in this notebook, their pain and desperation captured and commodified. For the first time since beginning this investigation, Hamish felt a flicker of something that was not quite sympathy for the murderer, but was certainly understanding. Whoever had killed Moira Campbell had done so with clear intent and careful planning, but they had also done so from a place of deep moral outrage. This was not a crime of passion or random violence. This was execution. His phone rang again. It was Angela Brodie, her voice excited. "Hamish, I've been thinking about something. The day before Christmas Eve, I was at the church hall helping to sort donations. Moira was there, and a delivery arrived. A package addressed to her specifically marked as a special donation for the Christmas event. She was very particular about it, said it was from an important donor who wanted to remain anonymous. She put it in the storage room herself and would not let anyone else touch it. Did you see what was in the package? No, but it was about the right size for a Christmas stocking. And Hamish, she seemed almost smug about it, like it proved how important she was that people would send special donations directly to her. Hamish felt the pieces shifting again. A package delivered 2 days before Christmas, Moira putting it away herself, not letting anyone else handle it. The red velvet stocking that stood out from all the others. The poisoned chocolates inside it. Someone had sent the death package directly to Moira, knowing her vanity and self-importance would ensure she noticed it, would make her want to check it personally. They had counted on her narcissism to deliver the poison right to her. It was clever and cruel and disturbingly effective. He thanked Angela and sat thinking in Moira's study as darkness fell completely outside. Robert Mackenzie remained his primary suspect. The fingerprint, the motive, the technical skills, the opportunity. But the delivery of the package complicated things. Had Mackenzie sent it through the post? Had he hired someone to deliver it? Or was there something else going on? Some piece of the puzzle Hamish was still missing. The snow had finally stopped falling when Hamish left the cottage and drove back to the police station. Lugs followed him inside, settled beside the fire Hamish built in the old stove, and watched with patient eyes as his master worked late into the night. Hamish spread out all his notes, all the evidence, looking for the pattern, looking for the proof he needed. Somewhere in all this information was the truth. He just had to find it before Blair's impatience forced an arrest that might or might not be just. Chapter 5. The Daughters. Memory. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had plummeted, turning Loch Dubh into a frozen landscape of crystalline beauty. Hamish was up before dawn, having slept poorly, his dreams filled with images of a little girl's face on fundraising leaflets and a dead woman slumped in her chair. His phone rang at 7. It was Constable Fraser from Dingwall, her voice troubled. "Constable Macbeth, I thought you should know. Robert Mackenzie came to the station this morning asking to speak with you. He says he has something important to tell you about the case. He brought his daughter with him." "I will be there within the hour," Hamish said, already reaching for his jacket. When he arrived at the Dingwall station, he found Robert Mackenzie sitting in an interview room, his arm around Lily, who clutched a battered teddy bear and looked frightened. Mackenzie's face was grey with exhaustion and stress, the face of a man who had spent the night wrestling with an impossible decision. Constable Fraser sat with them, having provided hot chocolate for the girl and tea for her father. She gave Hamish a meaningful look as he entered. "This is his idea," she said quietly. He insisted on coming in. Hamish pulled up a chair and sat across from them. "Mr. Mackenzie, what did you want to tell me?" Mackenzie looked down at his daughter, then back at Hamish. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Lily has something to show you, something I did not know about until last night." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a child's drawing, and slid it across the table. "Tell the policeman what you told me, love." Lily looked up at Hamish with those enormous dark eyes that had stared out from so many fundraising leaflets. When she spoke, her voice was small but clear. "I made a Christmas stocking for the lady with the camera. The mean lady who took our picture." Hamish felt his heart skip a beat. "You made a Christmas stocking? When did you do this?" 3 weeks ago, when Daddy was working at the hospital. He took me with him because school was on holiday. While he was working, I walked around the village. I saw the church hall and the poster about the Christmas stockings for homeless people, and I remembered the mean lady who took our picture. What did you remember about her, Lily?" Lily's face scrunched up with remembered anger. She was not nice. She said she was helping us, but she made me sit on the dirty ground even though I did not want to. She told Daddy to look sad, like it was a game, but it was not a game. We were really sad. And later, when Daddy found out she used my picture everywhere, he was so upset. I heard him crying in his room. "So you decided to make her a stocking?" Lily nodded. "I wanted to give her something bad, to make her feel sad like we felt. I found a pretty red stocking at a charity shop and filled it with things. I put in chocolates that I made myself in the kitchen when Daddy was at work." Hamish felt the case unravelling in an entirely unexpected direction. His voice was very gentle when he spoke. "Lily, how did you make the chocolates? I watched videos on YouTube about making chocolate candy. It is not hard. You just melt chocolate and pour it into moulds. But I wanted to make them yucky, so the mean lady would eat them and they would taste bad and make her sick, like when you eat too much candy and get a tummy ache." "What did you put in them to make them yucky?" Lily pulled out a tablet, the kind of basic device many children had for schoolwork and games. She opened the browser history, which no one had thought to check because who would suspect a 7-year-old of murder? There were searches for how to make someone sick, how to make bad chocolate, what makes chocolate taste bitter. And there, near the bottom of the search history, was the query that made Hamish's blood run cold. "What is nicotine? And where do you find it?" "Lily," Hamish said, keeping his voice calm and gentle even as his mind raced. "Where did you get nicotine?" "At Daddy's work, the hospital where he fixes things. I saw bottles of something in the storage room where they keep the stop-smoking medicines. The bottles said nicotine on them. I looked it up, and it said nicotine makes people feel sick and can be poisonous. So I took one of the bottles and used it to make the chocolate special." Robert Mackenzie had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Hamish looked at this man who had worked so hard to build a life for his daughter, only to discover that she had committed murder trying to protect him. The tragedy of it was almost unbearable. "Lily," Hamish said, "how did you get the stocking to the mean lady?" "I asked a man who was delivering things to the hospital if he would take a package to the church hall in the village. I said it was a donation for the Christmas charity and my daddy was too busy to deliver it. I'd wrapped it up nice with paper and a card that said it was from an anonymous donor. The man was nice and said he would drop it off." Mackenzie finally looked up, his eyes red and devastated. "She told me all this last night. She was proud of herself, thought she had done something clever to punish someone who had hurt us. She had no idea, no understanding of what she had actually done. She is 7 years old, Constable. She does not even fully understand what death means. She thought she was just making the woman sick." Hamish sat back, his mind reeling. A 7-year-old child who had watched YouTube videos and stolen nicotine from a hospital supply room. A child who had made poisoned chocolates with the innocent intention of giving someone a stomachache. A child who had no concept of lethal doses or long-term consequences. And an innocent father whose fingerprint on the stocking had made him the primary suspect, when all he had done was touch the stocking his daughter had made while she was showing it to him before wrapping it. This changed everything. Under Scottish law, A child under the age of 8 could not be held criminally responsible for their actions. Lily Mackenzie could not be prosecuted for murder because she was legally incapable of forming criminal intent. But Robert Mackenzie was still responsible for her actions as her parent, still guilty of negligence for not properly supervising her, for not securing the nicotine bottles at his workplace, for not knowing what she was planning. Constable Fraser looked as shocked as Hamish felt. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Hamish looked at Lily, still clutching her teddy bear, still not fully understanding the magnitude of what she had done. He thought about Moira Campbell, exploitative and greedy and cruel, but not deserving of death. He thought about Robert Mackenzie, who had fought his way out of homelessness, only to have his life destroyed by his daughter's misguided attempt at revenge. "We follow the law," Hamish said finally. "We document everything, we report to the Procurator Fiscal, and we let the legal system determine what happens next. But first," he looked at Mackenzie, "we need to arrange for Lily to speak with a child psychologist. She needs help understanding what has happened, and she needs support to deal with the consequences." Mackenzie nodded, tears streaming down his face. "What will happen to us? Will I go to jail? Will they take her away from me?" "I do not know," Hamish said honestly. "That will be for the courts to decide. But I will document exactly what happened here, including the fact that you came forward voluntarily as soon as you learned the truth. That will count for something." As he drove back to Loch Dubh later that morning, with Lugg silent beside him, Hamish thought about justice and innocence and the terrible complexity of human behaviour. A child's attempt at revenge had resulted in murder. But could you call it murder when the child had no concept of what she was doing? A father had lost everything trying to build a life for his daughter, and now he might lose her anyway. And a woman who had exploited the vulnerable had died at the hands of one of her victims, though that victim had been too young to understand the permanence of death. The law had clear answers to some questions, but the moral weight of this case, the human tragedy of it, could not be resolved by legal statutes and courtroom procedures. Someone had died. Someone else's life would be forever marked by having caused that death, even if they were too young to be held accountable. And somewhere in between was a father who had done his best and found it was not enough. Hamish knew he had a long day ahead of him, reporting to Blair, documenting every detail, preparing the case for the Procurator Fiscal. But before he did any of that, he stopped at the church overlooking the loch and sat in the empty sanctuary, thinking about grace and punishment, mercy and justice, and all the grey areas in between where most of human life actually took place. Chapter 6. The Weight of Consequences. The news of Lily Mackenzie's confession spread through Loch Dubh like wildfire, despite Hamish's best efforts to keep the details confidential. By noon, the whole village knew that a 7-year-old child had poisoned Moira Campbell, and opinions were sharply divided about what should happen next. Hamish spent the morning on the phone with Blair, the Procurator Fiscal, and Child Services, explaining the situation over and over again. Blair was furious that the prime suspect had turned out to be legally too young to be charged, ranting about wasted police resources and complicated cases. The Procurator Fiscal was more measured, asking detailed questions about the evidence and Lily's understanding of her actions. Child Services sent a social worker to interview Lily and assess the home situation. Hamish drove back to Dingwall to be present for the interview, wanting to ensure that both Lily and her father were treated fairly. The social worker, a patient woman named Margaret Ross, spent 2 hours talking with Lily, asking gentle questions about her understanding of death, her motivations, her relationship with her father. What emerged from the interview was a picture of a bright but traumatized child who had been trying to protect her father from further hurt. Lily understood that her actions had made Moira Campbell very sick, but she still did not fully grasp that death was permanent, that Moira would never wake up, that what Lily had done could not be undone. She thought of it like in cartoons, Margaret explained to Hamish afterward, where characters get hurt but pop back up in the next scene. The concept of irreversible death is developmentally beyond her at this age, especially given the trauma she has already experienced losing her mother. "What happens to her now?" Hamish asked. Margaret sighed. "That is complicated. She cannot be criminally charged due to her age, but Child Services has to consider whether she poses a danger to others and whether her father can adequately supervise her. We will also need to assess Robert's negligence in allowing her access to toxic substances and in not monitoring her activities closely enough. He was working, trying to provide for her, Hamish protested. He had no way of knowing what she was planning. I understand that, Margaret said, and it will be taken into consideration. But the fact remains that a child in his care obtained a deadly poison and used it to kill someone. We have to determine if she can safely remain in his custody or if she needs to be placed in foster care while they both receive intensive therapy. The thought of Lily being taken from her father, the one stable person in her traumatic young life, made Hamish's stomach turn. But he understood the legal and ethical obligations at play. The system had to protect the child, even if that protection might cause her further harm in the short term. Back in Lochdu, Hamish found the village in an uproar. The Curry sisters were holding forth at the general store, declaring that a child capable of murder was a child who had been poorly raised and should be removed from her father's care immediately. Dr. Brodie took the opposite view, arguing in the pub that separating a traumatized child from her only parent would cause more harm than good. Angela Brodie sought Hamish out at the police station that afternoon, her face troubled. I have been thinking about this situation, she said. That poor child. She was trying to defend her father in the only way she could understand. And Moira, for all that she did not deserve to die, she created the situation that led to this tragedy. If she had not exploited those photographs, if she had shown basic human decency, none of this would have happened. That is true, Hamish said, but it does not change what Lily did, or the fact that someone died. No, Angela agreed, but it should matter in how we respond. We have a choice here, Hamish. We can treat this as a straightforward case of crime and punishment, or we can recognise it as a symptom of larger failures. Moira's exploitation of vulnerable people, the lack of oversight in charitable fundraising, the desperation that drives people to homelessness in the first place. This child is a victim too, even though she caused a death. Hamish knew Angela was right, but he also knew the law did not always allow for such nuanced considerations. The system would process this case according to its rules and precedents, and the human complexity of it might be lost in the machinery of justice. That evening, Hamish received a call from the hospital in Dingwall. The administrator wanted to discuss the theft of nicotine from their storage room and their potential liability in the case. Hamish drove over to meet with her, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Patricia MacLeod, who managed the facility with military efficiency. We have reviewed our security footage and our inventory logs, she said, spreading papers across her desk. Lily Mackenzie accessed the supply room 3 times during the 2 days her father was working here. The first time, she was just looking around. The second time, she took a bottle of liquid nicotine from the shelf. The third time, she returned the bottle, now nearly empty. Why did no one notice a child wandering around the hospital alone? Hamish asked. Dr. MacLeod had the grace to look embarrassed. It was a breakdown in our protocols. Robert Mackenzie had permission to have his daughter with him while he worked, as she was on school holiday, and he had no other childcare. We assumed she would stay with him in the areas where he was installing equipment. We did not realize she was exploring the building unsupervised. And the supply room? How did she access it? Another security failure. The room should have been locked, but maintenance workers often propped the door open when they were working nearby to save time going back and forth. Lily must have noticed this and taken advantage of it. Hamish made notes, thinking about the chain of small failures that had led to tragedy. A door left unlocked, a child unsupervised, a bottle of poison within easy reach. Any one of these failures prevented might have stopped what happened. The hospital is reviewing all of our security procedures, Dr. MacLeod continued. We are installing better locks, implementing stricter sign-in protocols for visitors, including family members of workers, and doing a complete audit of all controlled substances. This should never have been possible, but it was possible, Hamish said. And now a woman is dead, and a child's life is forever changed. Your improved security will not undo any of that. He drove back to Lochdu in a dark mood, thinking about systems and failures, about how society set up rules and procedures, and then failed to enforce them properly. If the hospital had followed its own protocols, Lily never would have obtained the nicotine. If Moira Campbell had followed ethical guidelines for charity work and photography, Robert Mackenzie would never have had cause for complaint, and Lily would never have felt the need to defend him. At the police station, Hamish found a message from the Procurator Fiscal. They had made a decision about how to proceed. Robert Mackenzie would not be charged with murder or manslaughter, as there was no evidence he had known about or participated in his daughter's plans. However, he would face charges of child neglect for failing to adequately supervise her. If convicted, he could face up to a year in prison. Lily would not be charged with any crime, but would be made subject to a supervision order. She would be required to attend therapy sessions with a child psychologist, and would be monitored by social services for at least 2 years. If her therapy progressed well, and she demonstrated understanding of the wrongfulness of her actions, she could remain in her father's care. If not, foster placement would be reconsidered. It was as merciful an outcome as the law allowed, but Hamish took no comfort in it. A father would potentially go to jail for his daughter's crime. A child would grow up knowing she had killed someone, even if she had not fully understood what she was doing at the time. And Moira Campbell was still dead, her exploitation finally catching up with her in the most tragic way possible. That night, Hamish sat by his fire with lugs at his feet, staring into the flames and thinking about justice. The law said Lily Mackenzie was too young to be held criminally responsible for her actions. The law said Robert Mackenzie had failed in his duty to protect his child from herself. The law said certain procedures must be followed, certain outcomes must result from certain actions. But the law, Hamish thought, knew nothing about desperation or love, about a father trying to build a life from nothing, or a daughter trying to defend him. The law could not account for the human heart, could not measure the weight of good intentions against terrible outcomes. It could only process actions and assign consequences, mechanical and impersonal. Tomorrow he would have to submit his final report on the case. He would document every detail, every piece of evidence, every interview and revelation. He would write it all down in clear, precise language, turning human tragedy into official record. And somewhere in Dingwall, a little girl would go to sleep not fully understanding that her life had changed forever, that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, that she had learned too early that actions have consequences that cannot be undone. Chapter 7. The Village Debates. The case of Moira Campbell's murder became the sole topic of conversation in Lochdoub over the following days. Hamish could not enter the general store without being cornered by someone wanting to share their opinion on what should happen to Robert Mackenzie and his daughter. The village had split into distinct camps, each convinced they had the moral high ground. The Curry sisters led the hardline faction, declaring that a child capable of murder, whatever her age, was a danger to society and should be institutionalized. They held court in the general store, voices rising with righteous indignation. That girl knew exactly what she was doing, Nessie Curry proclaimed, her twin sister Jessie nodding vigorously beside her. Children today have access to too much information on those computers. She looked up how to poison someone. That shows deliberation. She's 7 years old, Mr. Patel interjected mildly from behind the counter. 7-year-olds do not have the capacity for legal deliberation. Then her father should be held responsible, Nessie shot back. He clearly failed to raise her properly. Look at what she has done. The Curry sisters found allies in some of the older residents, those who believed in strict accountability and traditional notions of right and wrong. But they were countered by another faction, led by Angela Brodie and the Reverend Macpherson, who argued for compassion and rehabilitation. This is a tragedy for everyone involved, Angela said at an impromptu meeting in the church hall that evening. Moira Campbell exploited vulnerable people for profit. Robert Mackenzie was one of those victims. His daughter witnessed his pain and wanted to stop it. What she did was terrible, but it came from a place of love and protection, not malice. Murder is murder, one of the Curry supporters argued. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Is it murder if the person committing it does not understand what death means? The Reverend countered. Our legal system recognizes that children below a certain age cannot form criminal intent. Are we wiser than the law? Hamish watched these debates from the sidelines, saying little. As the investigating officer, he had to remain impartial, could not let personal feelings influence his report or testimony. But privately, he found himself torn. He understood both sides. Children needed to learn that actions had consequences, but they also deserved mercy for their developmental limitations. Dr. Brodie approached him after one particularly heated discussion at the pub. "You are being very quiet about all this, Hamish. What do you really think?" Hamish sipped his whiskey, considering his words carefully. "I think Moira Campbell was a deeply flawed person who exploited others for personal gain. I think Robert Mackenzie did the best he could in terrible circumstances. I think Lily Mackenzie is a child who made a catastrophic mistake, and I think there are no good answers here, only least bad options." "That is unusually philosophical for you," Dr. Brodie observed. "It is an unusual case. Most murders have clear villains and victims. This one has victims on all sides." What troubled Hamish most was the information he had uncovered about Moira Campbell's other victims. Using the detailed notebook he had found in her desk, he had tracked down several other people whose photographs she had exploited. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. Moira had approached them during their most vulnerable moments, promised the photos were for documentation purposes only, then plastered their images across fundraising materials without permission or compensation. One woman, Sarah McIntyre, had been photographed with her infant son while they were sleeping rough in Edinburgh. When Sarah saw her photo on a billboard months later, she had tried to complain but had been brushed off by Moira with vague promises that never materialized. The experience had added to Sarah's trauma, made her distrustful of anyone offering help, nearly derailed her efforts to find stable housing. Another man, James Drummond, had been photographed at a soup kitchen in Glasgow. His grown children had seen the image on a fundraising leaflet and been devastated to learn their father was homeless. The family breach that resulted had never healed. James blamed Moira for destroying his relationship with his children, for making his private struggles public without his consent. Hamish documented all of this in his report, understanding that it would not excuse Lily's actions, but might provide context for them. Moira Campbell's death was not an isolated incident of senseless violence. It was the end point of a pattern of exploitation and harm that she had inflicted on vulnerable people over several years. One afternoon, Hamish received an unexpected visitor at the police station. It was Margaret Ross, the social worker who had interviewed Lily. She carried a folder of documents and wore an expression that suggested difficult news. "I wanted to update you on our assessment of the Mackenzie situation," she said, settling into the chair across from Hamish's desk. "We have completed our evaluation and made our recommendations to the children's panel. And," Margaret opened her folder, scanning the contents, "Robert Mackenzie is not a neglectful father in the traditional sense. His home is clean and safe, his daughter is well cared for physically, he provides emotional support and stability. His failure was in not recognizing the depth of his daughter's trauma and rage, and in not securing the workplace environment adequately. However, we do not believe removing Lily from his care would serve her best interests." Hamish felt a wave of relief. "So she stays with him?" "With conditions. Robert will be required to attend parenting classes focused on trauma-informed care. Lily will have twice-weekly therapy sessions for at least 6 months, then once weekly after that. A social worker will conduct monthly home visits for 2 years. And Robert cannot work in any position that gives him access to controlled substances or dangerous materials until Lily is at least 12 years old. That means he loses his hospital job," Hamish said. Margaret nodded. "It is a significant hardship, yes, but it is the only way we can ensure Lily's safety and the safety of others. Robert has agreed to these terms. He is grateful Lily will not be taken from him. What about the criminal charges he faces? That is between him and the courts. But our recommendation will note that he has cooperated fully, that he came forward voluntarily when he learned the truth, and that removing him from his daughter's life through incarceration would cause more harm than good." Margaret paused, then added more quietly, "Off the record, Constable, I hope the sheriff shows mercy. This man has been through enough." After Margaret left, Hamish sat thinking about the conditions that would now govern the Mackenzie family's life. Therapy and monitoring, restrictions and supervision. It was perhaps the best outcome available given the circumstances, but it was hardly a happy ending. Robert would struggle to find work with his new restrictions. Lily would grow up knowing she was different, marked by what she had done. That evening, Hamish walked down to the loch with lugs, needing the peace and clarity that came from watching the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and pink that reflected on the still surface of the loch. It was beautiful and serene, a reminder that the world continued regardless of human tragedy. He thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by this case, the other victims of Moira's exploitation, now dealing with renewed trauma as the story became public, the homeless families who had come to the Christmas event hoping for help, only to witness death, the volunteers who had believed they were doing good work, now questioning whether their charity had been tainted by Moira's corruption. And he thought about Lily Mackenzie, 7 years old, who would carry the weight of her actions for the rest of her life. She might not understand it fully now, but someday she would. Someday she would be old enough to grasp the permanence of death, the magnitude of what she had done. How would she live with that knowledge? How would she build a life knowing she had taken one? These were the questions that kept Hamish awake at night, questions the law could not answer. The legal system could process the case, assign consequences, mandate therapy and supervision, but it could not heal the fundamental wound at the heart of this tragedy, could not undo what had been done, or restore what had been lost. As darkness fell over Loch Dubh, Hamish turned back toward the village, lugs padding beside him. Tomorrow he would submit his final report. Tomorrow the case would move forward through the judicial system. Tomorrow life would continue, as it always did, carrying everyone forward whether they were ready or not. But tonight, standing by the loch in the gathering darkness, Hamish felt the full weight of what they had all been through, and he wondered if any of them, victim or perpetrator or witness, would ever truly find peace. Chapter 8. The reckoning approaches. Robert Mackenzie's court date arrived on a grey January morning. Hamish drove to Dingwall to attend the hearing, feeling it was his duty to see the case through to its conclusion. The courtroom was small and sombre, with worn wooden benches and a sense of weariness that came from processing endless human failures and tragedies. Robert sat with his court-appointed lawyer, a young woman named Sarah Munro who specialised in family law. He looked smaller than Hamish remembered, worn down by weeks of stress and uncertainty. Lily was not present, having been left with Robert's mother for the day. No child should have to watch their father face judgment for their actions. The sheriff presiding over the case was Alan Crawford, a man known for his fairness and his tendency to consider the full context of cases rather than simply applying the law mechanically. Hamish had testified before him several times over the years and respected his judgment. The hearing began with the prosecutor presenting the charges. Robert Mackenzie was accused of willful neglect of a child under his care, specifically failing to adequately supervise his daughter and failing to secure dangerous substances to which she had access through his workplace. The prosecutor laid out the facts of the case with clinical precision, making Robert's failures sound damning. Then Sarah Munro stood to present the defence. She painted a different picture, one of a father who had clawed his way out of homelessness, who worked hard to provide for his daughter, who had done everything he could with the resources available to him. She called character witnesses, Robert's supervisor from the hospital, the teacher from Lily's school, the volunteer from the homeless shelter where they had stayed. Each witness testified to Robert's devotion to his daughter, his determination to give her a stable life, his exhaustion from working multiple jobs to make ends meet. The hospital supervisor admitted that the facility had failed to enforce its own security protocols, that the door to the supply room should have been locked at all times but rarely was, that no one had thought to question why a child was wandering the corridors alone. When Hamish was called to testify, he spoke carefully but honestly. He described Robert's shock when he learned what Lily had done, his immediate cooperation with the investigation, his voluntary disclosure of information that could have incriminated him. He talked about the circumstances that had led to Lily's actions, the exploitation by Moira Campbell, the trauma the family had suffered. Constable Macbeth, the prosecutor said during cross-examination, "Do you believe Robert Mackenzie bears no responsibility for what his daughter did?" "I believe he bears some responsibility," Hamish replied. "As Lily's father, he is responsible for her actions. But I also believe the responsibility is shared. The hospital failed to secure dangerous substances. Moira Campbell created the conditions that drove a child to seek revenge. And society failed this family when it allowed them to become homeless in the first place. Robert Mackenzie's crime, if it is a crime, is being exhausted and overwhelmed and human." The prosecutor tried to push back, but Hamish held firm. He had spent weeks investigating this case, had seen every angle of it, and he knew where the moral weight truly lay. Robert Mackenzie was not a criminal in any meaningful sense. He was a victim of circumstance who had done his best and found it was not enough. After the testimonies concluded, Sheriff Crawford called for a recess to consider his judgment. Hamish went to a cafe across the street from the courthouse, nursing a cup of tea and thinking about what might happen next. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to a year in prison, though suspended sentences were possible for first-time offenders in cases involving unusual circumstances. When court reconvened 2 hours later, Sheriff Crawford's face was grave. He began by acknowledging the complexity of the case, the multiple failures that had contributed to the tragedy, the impossibility of assigning blame in any simple or satisfying way. "Robert Mackenzie, you stand charged with neglect of a child in your care. The facts are not in dispute. Your daughter committed a terrible act while under your supervision. She obtained a deadly poison from your workplace and used it to kill another human being. As her parent, you bear legal responsibility for her actions." Robert sat very still, his hands clenched on the table before him. "However," the sheriff continued, "this court must also consider the context of those actions. Your daughter is 7 years old, an age at which children cannot form criminal intent. She acted not from malice but from a misguided desire to protect you from further harm by someone who had exploited your family. The person she killed had indeed committed exploitation, had violated ethical standards, had caused genuine harm. Furthermore, your failure to supervise was not willful neglect, but rather the inevitable result of being a single parent working to provide for your child. The hospital where you worked failed to enforce basic security protocols. The charity organization that employed the victim failed to oversee her activities. There were systemic failures at every level. None of this excuses what happened. Your daughter caused a death, and that death cannot be undone. But assigning all blame to you would be neither just nor productive." Hamish leaned forward, hardly breathing, waiting for the judgment. "Therefore," Sheriff Crawford said, "I am sentencing you to 6 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. This means you will not serve time in prison unless you commit another offence during the next 2 years. You will be placed on probation, will be required to attend parenting classes and regular meetings with a social worker, and will comply with all conditions set by child services regarding your daughter's care. Additionally, you will perform 200 hours of community service with organisations supporting homeless families. Your experience gives you unique insight that could benefit others in similar situations." Robert's shoulders shook with silent sobs. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, steadying him. Hamish felt his own tension release, relief flooding through him. It was as merciful a sentence as could have been hoped for, acknowledging Robert's failures while also recognising the impossible position he had been in. The sheriff continued, speaking directly to Robert now. "Mr. Mackenzie, your daughter will need you in the difficult years ahead. She will need help understanding what she has done, help processing the guilt and trauma that will come when she's old enough to fully grasp the permanence of death. You cannot be that help from a prison cell. I am giving you the opportunity to remain in your daughter's life and to guide her through this. Do not waste it." "Yes, sir," Robert managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, sir." After the hearing ended, Hamish spoke briefly with Robert outside the courthouse. The man looked simultaneously relieved and devastated, the weight of the suspended sentence hanging over him like a shadow. "I have 2 years to prove I can be a better father," Robert said. 2 years to help Lily understand what she did and why it was wrong. 2 years to rebuild our lives while being monitored and supervised and judged. "You have 2 years to show everyone what I already saw," Hamish countered, "that you are a good man who loves his daughter and is trying his best in impossible circumstances. Take the help being offered. Go to the classes, do the community service, work with the social workers, and most importantly, help Lily heal. Robert nodded, wiping his eyes. What about the woman who died? Does she get any justice? Hamish considered the question. Justice is a complicated thing in this case. Moira Campbell exploited vulnerable people for profit. She caused real harm to real people, including your family. What happened to her was not right, was not proportionate to her crimes, but neither was she an innocent victim. Perhaps the justice is that her exploitation has been exposed, that her charity has been shut down, that the money she raised will now be properly distributed to the people it was meant to help. That is not the same as criminal justice, but it is something. They parted ways, Robert returning to his mother's house to be reunited with Lily, Hamish driving back to Lochdoub through winter landscape that seemed somehow softer than it had in recent weeks. The snow was beginning to melt, revealing hints of the ground beneath. Spring would come eventually, bringing renewal and growth. Whether the Mackenzie family would find renewal as well remained to be seen. Back in Lochdoub, Hamish found the village still processing the outcome of the case. Opinion remained divided. Though the sheriff's judgment had given weight to the Mercy faction, even the Curry sisters had to admit that sending Robert to prison would have served no useful purpose, though they maintained that standards were slipping and children were not being properly disciplined these days. That evening, Hamish sat in his cottage with Lugs, writing the final entries in his case file. He documented the court proceedings, the judgment, the sentence. He noted that the case was now closed from a criminal justice perspective, though the social services involvement would continue for years. He attached copies of all the evidence, all the witness statements, all the pieces of the complex puzzle that had consumed his attention for weeks. When he finished, he sat back and looked at the thick file before him. It represented one of the strangest cases he had ever worked, a murder committed by a child too young to understand death, motivated by love for her father, enabled by systemic failures at multiple levels. There were no heroes in this story, only flawed humans doing their best or worst or something in between. Tomorrow he would file the report and move on to other cases, other problems. Life in Lochdoub would continue its normal rhythm of small dramas and quiet joys. But Hamish knew he would never forget this case, would never stop wondering about Lily Mackenzie and what kind of person she would become. Would she be crushed by the weight of what she had done, or would she find a way to build something meaningful from the ruins of her childhood? Only time would tell, and time, as always, would keep moving forward, carrying everyone along with it, whether they were ready or not. Chapter 9. The aftermath unfolds. 3 months after the court hearing, spring came to Lochdoub with sudden determination. The snow melted in rushing streams, the loch filled with migrating birds, and flowers began, pushing up through the thawed ground. The village emerged from winter like a hibernating animal, stretching and blinking in the lengthening days. Hamish had thought the Campbell case was behind him, filed away in the archives, but its ripples continued to spread through the community and beyond. The Charity Commission had launched a full investigation into Moira Campbell's Christmas stocking fund, and what they discovered confirmed Hamish's worst suspicions. Over the course of 5 years, Moira had raised nearly £200,000 using photographs of homeless people and heartbreaking appeals. Of that amount, less than £30,000 had actually been spent on charitable activities. The rest had been categorised as administrative expenses, but further investigation revealed those expenses were largely personal enrichment. Designer clothes labelled as professional wardrobe, luxury holidays labelled as fundraising trips, expensive photography equipment labelled as necessary operational costs. The Charity Commission shut down the organisation and appointed an administrator to distribute the remaining funds properly. But the real damage went beyond mere finances. The people Moira had photographed, whose suffering she had commodified, found their worst moments suddenly public again as the story made national news. Several of them contacted Hamish, asking if there was any way to have their images removed from circulation to reclaim some privacy and dignity. Hamish did what he could, working with the Charity Commission and the media to ensure that the photographs were no longer used and that the identities of the people in them were protected. but the damage had been done. Their private pain had been made public spectacle, and no amount of legal manoeuvring could undo that violation. One of those people was Sarah McIntyre, the woman who had been photographed with her infant son. She came to Lochdoub in April, wanting to speak with Hamish about the case. They met at the cafe near the police station, and Sarah brought her son, now a toddler, healthy and happy despite their difficult start. "I needed to see where it happened," Sarah explained, watching her son colour in a picture book. "I needed to understand how that woman finally faced consequences for what she did to all of us." She paused, then added quietly, "I know I should not be glad someone died, but I cannot help feeling that some kind of balance has been restored." Hamish stirred his coffee, choosing his words carefully. Moira Campbell did not deserve to die for her crimes, but neither did she deserve to profit from other people's suffering. The child who killed her did not understand what she was doing, but she understood that someone had hurt her father, and she wanted to stop that hurt. There is a kind of rough justice in that, even if it is not the justice the legal system would have chosen. Sarah nodded. "I heard about the girl. 7 years old. God, that breaks my heart. She will carry that weight forever, will not she? Just like we carry the weight of having our worst moments turned into advertising campaigns." "Probably," Hamish agreed, "but maybe she will find a way to make something meaningful from it. Maybe when she's older, she will understand that she exposed a predator, even if she did so through terrible means. Maybe that will give her some peace." They talked for another hour, Sarah sharing her story of rebuilding her life after homelessness. She had found stable housing through a council program, had enrolled in training to become a healthcare assistant, was building a future for herself and her son. The photograph that Moira had taken haunted her still, but she was learning to live with that ghost, to accept that part of her story while not letting it define her entirely. After Sarah left, Hamish reflected on the strange mathematics of harm and healing. Moira Campbell had hurt dozens of people through her exploitation. Her death had hurt her family, few though they were, and had traumatized everyone who witnessed it. Lily Mackenzie had been hurt by homelessness and her mother's death and the exploitation of her image. Robert Mackenzie had been hurt by poverty and prejudice, and the criminal justice system that saw him as neglectful rather than desperate. Concentric circles of pain spreading outward from multiple points of origin, overlapping and interacting in ways impossible to fully map or measure. No wonder the court struggled to assign blame and calculate appropriate punishment. Human suffering did not fit neatly into legal categories or moral frameworks. It spilled over boundaries, ignored rules, created consequences that no one had intended or anticipated. In May, Hamish received a letter from Robert Mackenzie. It was written in careful handwriting, clearly laboured over, every word chosen with thought. Robert wrote about his community service work with homeless charities, how painful and healing it was to return to that world not as a client, but as a helper. He wrote about Lily's therapy, which was going well but slowly. The therapist helping her understand death and consequences in age-appropriate ways. She drew a picture for Mrs. Campbell, Robert wrote. Her therapist suggested it as a way of acknowledging what happened. Lily drew an angel with wings and wrote, "I am sorry," in her best writing. "We do not know what to do with it. There is no one to give it to, no grave to leave it at since Mrs. Campbell was cremated and her ashes scattered in Edinburgh. But Lily wanted you to know she made it. She wanted you to know she understands, as much as a 7-year-old can, that what she did was wrong." Hamish read the letter 3 times, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. He had seen many criminals express remorse over the years, some genuine and some calculated. But this felt different, a child's apology, mediated through art and therapy, struggling to comprehend something developmentally, beyond her grasp. It was heartbreaking and somehow hopeful at the same time. He wrote back to Robert, thanking him for the update and encouraging him to continue the difficult work of helping Lily understand and heal. He suggested that they might keep the picture, let Lily hold on to it until she was older and could decide for herself what to do with it. Perhaps someday, when she was an adult, she would find a way to make amends that felt meaningful to her. The village of Lochdoub gradually absorbed the story of the Campbell case into its collective memory. turning it into one more tale of Highland drama to be discussed and debated for years to come. The church hall was cleaned and returned to normal use, though some people reported feeling uncomfortable there, as if Moira's death had left a shadow. The Christmas stocking charity was not revived, no one willing to take on the tainted legacy of Moira's exploitation. But other charities continued their work, more carefully monitored now, more aware of the ethical considerations involved in fundraising and photography. Some good had come from the tragedy, in that sense. Standards had been raised, oversight had been strengthened, vulnerable people had been given slightly more protection from exploitation. It was cold comfort to those most affected by the case, but it was something. And in Hamish's experience, something was often all you could hope for. Justice was rarely perfect or complete. It was usually partial and imperfect, leaving everyone involved with a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment, closure and lingering questions. As summer approached and the highlands blazed with purple heather and golden gorse, Hamish found himself thinking less about the Campbell case and more about the ongoing rhythms of village life. There were other problems to solve, other dramas to mediate, other people who needed help. Life continued, as it always did, carrying everyone forward. But on quiet evenings, when he walked by the loch with lugs and watched the sun set over the hills, Hamish sometimes thought about a little girl in Dingwall who was learning to live with what she had done. He thought about her father, working to build a life against difficult odds. He thought about all the people who had been hurt by Moira Campbell's exploitation and were now trying to heal, and he hoped that somehow, improbably, they would all find their way to something like peace. Not redemption, perhaps, which was too clean a word for such a messy tragedy, but at least to understanding and to the possibility of building something meaningful from the ruins of what had been broken. Chapter 10. The Long Shadow of Memory. A year after Moira Campbell's death, Hamish received an unexpected package in the post. It was addressed in childish handwriting, carefully formed letters that showed the painstaking effort of a young student. Inside was a drawing, the same angel picture that Robert had mentioned in his letter, and a note written in the same careful hand. Dear Mr. Macbeth, I am Lily. My daddy says you're a good policeman who helped us. I wanted to give you this picture I made. My therapist says I should not keep it hidden away because hiding makes secrets, and secrets make bad feelings grow. She says I should acknowledge what I did and try to do good things to balance it. I cannot bring Mrs. Campbell back, but I can try to be a good person and help people instead of hurting them. Thank you for being kind to my daddy. Love, Lily. Hamish sat at his kitchen table, holding the drawing and reading the note several times. 8 years old now, and already carrying a burden that would shape the rest of her life. He wondered what kind of person she would become, whether the weight would crush her, or whether she would find a way to transform it into something like strength. He wrote back to her, a carefully considered letter that he hoped struck the right balance between honesty and gentleness. He told her that everyone made mistakes, that what mattered was learning from them and trying to do better. He told her that her father loved her and was working hard to give her a good life. He told her that she had her whole life ahead of her and she could choose what to do with it. Then he put the angel picture up on his refrigerator, where he would see it every morning. It served as a reminder of the complexity of human behavior, the impossibility of simple categories like good and evil, the way pain and love could intertwine in ways that produced terrible outcomes from understandable motivations. The village of Lochdoub had largely moved on from the Campbell case, though it remained a touchstone in local memory. The story was retold at the pub, debated at the church social, referenced whenever discussions of charity or child-rearing arose. Everyone had an opinion about what had happened and what it meant, and those opinions hardened into certainty over time, as opinions do. But Hamish, who had lived through every moment of the investigation, who had seen every angle of the tragedy, remained uncertain about many things. He knew what had happened, but he was not always sure what it meant. He knew the legal outcome, but he was not always sure if justice had been served. What he did know was that the case had changed him in subtle ways. He found himself more attuned to the hidden suffering in the village, more aware of the desperate, quiet struggles people endured, while maintaining facades of normalcy. He found himself questioning assumptions about crime and punishment, about responsibility and rehabilitation, about the purpose of the justice system in addressing human complexity. In autumn, Hamish attended a conference on rural policing in Inverness. During a break between sessions, he found himself talking with a social worker about the Campbell case, which had become something of a case study in child welfare circles. The social worker knew Margaret Ross, who had supervised the Mackenzie family, and offered an update. "They are doing well, considering," the social worker said. "Lily is thriving in school, showing real academic promise. She's still in therapy but making good progress." Robert found work with a security company, doing consultations rather than hands-on installation, which keeps him within the restrictions of his supervision order. Margaret says they have become a model case for how families can recover from trauma with proper support. Hamish felt a wave of relief at this news. So often, the stories that crossed his desk ended badly, with broken families and repeated cycles of harm. To hear that the Mackenzies were building something positive from their terrible experience was heartening, but he also knew that their story was not finished. Lily would grow older, would eventually understand the full magnitude of what she had done. Adolescence would bring new challenges, new questions about identity and guilt and responsibility. Robert would carry the weight of supervision and suspicion for years, perhaps forever, marked as the father who had failed to prevent his daughter from committing murder. The ripples from that Christmas morning would continue spreading outward, touching lives in ways large and small, predictable and unexpected. Some of those touches would be healing, as people learned from the tragedy and worked to prevent similar failures. Some would be harmful, as prejudice and fear coloured people's perceptions of a father and daughter trying to rebuild their lives. In December, as another Christmas approached, Hamish thought about organising a proper memorial for Moira Campbell. Despite her flaws and crimes, she had been a human being, and her death marked a permanent loss. But when he floated the idea to the village council, he met with firm resistance. Moira Campbell had exploited too many people, had hurt too many vulnerable souls, to be memorialised or honoured. Instead, the council voted to establish a fund in memory of the homeless families who had been exploited by Moira's charity. The fund would provide direct assistance to people in need, with strict oversight and ethical guidelines. It would require consent from anyone whose story or image was shared, would ensure that fundraising was transparent and accountable, would prioritise the dignity and privacy of those being helped. It was named the Dignity Fund, and its first project was to commission a small sculpture for the village green. The sculpture showed a family, abstract but recognisable, supporting each other through hardship. A plaque explained that it was dedicated to all those who had experienced homelessness, exploitation, and the struggle to rebuild their lives with dignity intact. At the dedication ceremony on Christmas Eve, Hamish stood among the villagers and listened to speeches about compassion and accountability, about the importance of treating vulnerable people with respect, about learning from the past to build a better future. It was all well-meaning and somewhat self-congratulatory, the way such ceremonies always were. But when he looked at the sculpture, at the abstract family leaning on each other for support, he thought about Robert and Lily Mackenzie. He thought about all the people whose photographs had been exploited by Moira Campbell, who were now reclaiming their stories and their dignity. He thought about the messy reality of human suffering and resilience, about how justice was always imperfect but sometimes approached adequacy. That night, Christmas Eve in Lochdu, Hamish walked home through falling snow, lugs padding beside him, the village quiet around them. Lights glowed in cottage windows. Smoke rose from chimneys, and somewhere carolers were singing about peace on earth and goodwill to all. He thought about the year that had passed since Moira Campbell's death, about all the pain and healing and complicated justice that had unfolded. He thought about a little girl growing up with impossible knowledge, about a father working to prove he deserved a second chance, about a community trying to learn from tragedy without being consumed by it. And he thought about the angel picture on his refrigerator, a child's attempt at acknowledgement and apology, at understanding something beyond her years. Tomorrow morning, he would make his traditional Christmas breakfast, would take lugs for a walk up to the loch, would spend a quiet day being grateful for the simple peace of his life. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, he allowed himself to hope. To hope that Lily Mackenzie would find her way to a good life despite the shadow she carried. To hope that Robert Mackenzie would prove everyone wrong who doubted his ability to be a good father. To hope that the people who had been exploited would find healing and dignity. To hope that justice, imperfect and incomplete as it always was, had been served in some meaningful way. To hope that the long shadow of memory would eventually soften into something more like understanding. And to hope that when another Christmas came, and another after that, the weight of what had happened would become easier to carry for everyone involved. The snow fell gently on Loch, covering the village in fresh whiteness, hiding the scars and imperfections beneath a blanket of cold purity. Tomorrow the sun would rise on another Christmas day, and life would continue its complicated dance of joy and sorrow, justice and mercy, memory and hope. But tonight there was only the quiet beauty of falling snow, the warm glow of lamplight through windows, and the distant sound of carolers singing about peace. Tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and questions, its own struggles and small victories. But tonight, in this moment, Hamish Macbeth was content to walk through the snow with his dog, heading home to a warm fire and a peaceful evening. The case of the Christmas stocking stuffer. Murder was closed in the official records, filed away in archives where it would gather dust and eventually be forgotten by everyone except those most directly affected. But its lessons lingered, its questions remained unanswered, and its impact continued to shape the lives of everyone who had been touched by it. That, Hamish thought as he unlocked his door and stepped into the welcoming warmth of his cottage, was the nature of tragedy. It left marks that never fully faded, changed people in ways they never fully understood, posed questions that had no satisfying answers. All anyone could do was carry the weight with as much grace as possible, learn what lessons were available to be learned, and keep moving forward into whatever came next. He hung up his coat, fed Lugs his dinner, and settled into his chair by the fire with a cup of tea and a book. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the village of Loch slept peacefully beneath its white blanket. Inside, warm and safe and alone with his thoughts, Hamish Macbeth closed his eyes and let the events of the past year finally begin to recede into memory, where they would remain, indelible but distant, a reminder of the complicated nature of justice and the enduring mystery of the human heart.